Maggie had always known something was wrong with the farm, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Growing up there, it felt like home, until the strange things started happening. Her parents, quiet and distant, had never talked about the farm's history, nor did they speak of the people who lived there before them. But as Maggie got older, the unease began to creep into her bones. She thought it was just her imagination until the night she discovered the truth. It was late in October, the air sharp and heavy with the scent of decay. Maggie had been helping her father in the fields, harvesting the last of the corn, when she noticed something odd. The crops, normally thriving, had begun to rot at the edges. The once vibrant rows of golden stalks now looked sickly, their leaves curling and blackened. She pointed it out to her father, but he simply gave a quiet grunt, his gaze distant. "Don't worry about it, Maggie. Just focus on your work." But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The trees at the far edge of the property seemed to whisper in the wind, their branches moving in unnatural ways. She thought she saw figures lurking in the darkened corners of the field, shadows that darted just beyond the edge of her vision. That night, as she lay in bed, Maggie heard it. A soft tapping at her window. She didn't move at first, thinking it was a branch brushing against the glass. But then the tapping came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low voice, so soft it was almost a whisper. "Maggie. Maggie." Frozen, she dared not look outside. Her heart raced in her chest as the voice grew louder, more desperate. "Maggie. Come to the field." Unable to ignore it, Maggie finally crept out of bed, her breath shallow in the darkness. She grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed down the stairs, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. As she stepped outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap, sending a chill down her spine. The voice called to her again, this time from the direction of the cornfield. Reluctantly, she stepped toward it, the flashlight's beam dancing erratically as her hands shook. She didn't want to go, but she had to. When Maggie reached the center of the field, the whispering stopped. Silence pressed in on her from all sides. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as she turned slowly, scanning the empty rows. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with something alive, something ancient. The wind had died completely, and the night felt too still. Then she saw them. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms hidden beneath ragged cloaks. Their eyes gleamed red, reflecting the flashlight's beam with a hunger that made Maggie's blood run cold. The wind returned, but it was no longer the rustling of leaves, it was the sound of voices, chanting in an unintelligible language. "It's time," one of the figures rasped. Suddenly, Maggie was overwhelmed with the knowledge of what they were. She had heard the rumors about the farm, about the land that demanded a harvest every few decades. The blood of the innocent, the souls of the lost. And tonight, Maggie was the one they had come for. Panic surged within her as she turned to flee, but the figures were already surrounding her. Cold hands grasped her arms, pulling her into the center of a circle. The last thing she saw before everything went black was her father, standing at the edge of the field, his face expressionless, watching silently as the harvest took place. Ending, the next morning, the farm was silent. The crops had withered, the ground cracked and barren. Maggie was gone, as if she had never existed. But every year, when the wind picked up and the nights grew longer, the whispers could still be heard in the fields, calling to the next victim, waiting for the harvest.